Hello, everybody, and welcome to Common Sense with Curtis Scott. And I'm here today with Cliff Wiley for U.S. Congress District 6. How are you doing, Cliff?
I am well. Thank you for having me. Happy New Year.
Yes, sir. If you could just kind of give us a little lowdown about who you are, what you stand for, everything like that.
Yeah, my name is Cliff Wiley, and I'm running for Congressional District 6 here in Texas. I'm originally I was born and raised in Texas. I was born in Fort Worth. After 9/11, I joined the Marine Corps, and in the Marine Corps, I was an enlisted infantry Marine. And then after that, I went to school using those benefits and got my certifications to be a teacher in the state of Texas, and that's what I currently do. I am a high school U.S. history teacher down here in Corsicana in Navarro County.
Awesome. So you said Marine Corps infantry, huh?
Absolutely.
I'm a Marine myself, so I'm definitely kind of liking that already. But so I got a couple questions for you today, and the first question is going to be, why are you running for Congress?
Well, I decided to run for a couple of reasons. One, the first reason is, just like everybody else probably watching this interview, is kind of tired of the way our government's being run. Right? I'm tired of voting for candidates that when they were on the campaign trail, they were running as a conservative Republican, promising for fiscal responsibility and conservative legislation. And I spent my valuable vote on them based on what they promised. And then once they get to Washington, D.C., things kind of seem to turn in a 180 there, and they end up not voting the way they were promising to. Or if I have a question, I don't get a response. You know, they didn't have a problem responding during the campaign, but once we send them up there, they kind of forget who we are. And so I'm not a big fan of that. I feel like I'm not being represented the way I want to be. So, you know, if there's something I don't like, I want to stand up and do it myself. I better be willing to do that, and I am. And another reason I'm running is being a high school teacher at the high school. You know, at the high school level, the students are a little bit older, and we talk about current events. I mean, we deep dive the Constitution, and so when we're talking about current events, a lot of times students will straight up ask me, "Are they allowed to do that? Where in the Constitution, Mr. Wiley, are they allowed to do that?" And we'll open it up and we'll dive in there and we can't find it. And they're like, "Well, why do they do it?" And then we'll talk about it and I'll say, "I don't know." And they're, "Mr. Wiley, why don't you run? You know, you seem to know the Constitution." And so I took them up on it. And so here we are. We're in the fourth quarter of the campaign, a little over a month away from early voting, and we're ready to make this thing happen. We're not in this race to finish second.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. I like to hear this. The whole reason I started Common Sense with Curtis Scott was I call it the pandemic, and seeing what happened to our nation. And our nation was founded by our founding fathers on common sense. And I was reading the Common Sense pamphlet, and I was like, we've got to take our nation back to where it was originally intended to be going. And that's where I like to hear stuff like what you're talking about. So, but this is more about you and not about Common Sense with Curtis Scott. So we'll go on to the next question. And that is, what will be your number one priority as a U.S. representative?
My number one priority is going to be to represent the people of the District of Texas 6. All right. So a lot of people ask me where I stand on certain issues, and I have no problem giving answers to those. And I'm sure we'll deep dive into some of those here shortly. But a lot of times it doesn't really matter where I stand personally on it, because my job as a representative of Texas 6 is to go to Washington, D.C. and represent the will of the majority of the people in the district. It's not just my own personal will. So whatever it is that I stand for doesn't mean necessarily the rest of the district is going to stand for. Now, I feel like I'm pretty much on the same level on most issues with this district. So I don't think that's going to be a big issue. But the number one priority is just to bring back representation the way those founding fathers, when they set this experiment of a nation up, intended it to be. Now, there's a lot of issues that I want to go into, but number one is just bringing back true federal congressional representation to our citizens in this district.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so you've already kind of expanded a little bit on, or spoke a little bit about this, but how do you feel about the state of our nation right now? Or what do you feel about the state of our nation?
I'm concerned. right? And I know a lot of people are. We've got an administration right now that is actively implementing legislation that is hurting our country. It's hurting the citizens of the United States of America. And they don't seem to care much about it. Whether it be the open border and all the illegal immigrants that are flooding in, using our resources, are taking up seats in classrooms and or whatever it may be, it just doesn't seem like that their priority is to take care of us. It's to take care of other people trying to come in illegally. And I want to make sure that American citizens are the number one priority, and they should be, of our nation. And right now they're not.
Amen. I appreciate that. So the next question, we'll go ahead and move along. So do you believe the Constitution is the supreme law of the land?
I've got one with me everywhere I go. I am a firm believer in this Constitution. We've gotten to a point now, and this all started in the 1940s with the Administrative Procedures Act, right, where Congress started delegating their authority away to unelected bureaucrats, right, that don't have to answer to voters. And in here, in Article 1 of the Constitution, it lays out 18 enumerated powers that the legislative branch of the government has. And I think that we need to stick to those. They were very clearly written and not open to too much interpretation, at least in my opinion. But we've gotten to that administrative deep state where we really don't even know who it is that's running the country. So this is what we should be following. And I want to make sure everyone understands also that the Constitution, and this is something I teach my students every year, the Constitution does not give any United States citizens any rights. God gave us our natural rights. Those are unalienable rights. The Constitution is there just to protect those rights from a tyrannical government taking them from you. So this is just, the Constitution is just merely a protective measure to make sure that we maintain those natural rights. It doesn't give us those rights. I want to make sure that everyone understands that.
So you're saying we're endowed by our Creator?
Amen.
I appreciate that. So next question, I think you kind of already spoke on this too. And it is, do you support reducing the size of the federal government?
Absolutely. One of the things that I would like to do is to start, putting some of these Department of whatever, these three-letter agencies that we have in government, put them on the chopping block. And and just for an example, the FBI. I'm not really sure what the purpose of the FBI is, because every single state in our country has their own state law enforcement agency, right? So I don't know what we need the FBI for. So that's going to be one of the first things to go. The last thing that, one of the powers that Congress just granted them with the NDAA was the extension of the FISA, that Section 702, which grants them the permission to spy on American citizens without a warrant. And they're just being weaponized against us citizens. And, without them having an original purpose to begin with, I think it's one of the main first departments that I'll be looking to see what we can't do about getting rid of.
Well, here at Common Sense, I'll just say I've already been working on writing some things up on how we could maybe do a way to where, I'm not saying we don't need them totally, but I think if we don't need a federal institution. I'm a law enforcement officer myself. I have been since 1998, as soon as I got out of the Marine Corps. And so one of the things I believe is, if anything, we could refund that to a USBI or something like that, and do voted in like sheriff, something to where there's somebody regulating them. I know I'm kind of adding in this, but it's something that's been really hot on my, and I listen to all these people, and being a police officer, go ahead.
No, and I was just going to say, and at a minimum, and I agree, maybe not get rid of it completely, but I mean, really, really condense it in a big way. And whoever ends up being in charge of it, I think it needs to be the head of one of those state law enforcement agencies, not somebody that's already from the DC area. It needs to be someone from, one of the lead Texas law enforcement officers or something that goes to Washington, DC, not somebody that's already there.
So would you consider something like what I was talking about, maybe having like how our Senate is, to where we have 2 representatives from each state, and then maybe someone that's elected from within that group to be the head of the agency.
Yeah.
I mean,
I've never thought.
That's some of my common sense that I came up with. That it just makes sense.
It does make sense. It makes absolute sense.
So you consider something like that?
Absolutely.
Okay, I like to hear that. So moving on to the next question here, and it is, what is your stance on the Second Amendment?
I think the Second Amendment is one of the most clearly written amendments of all of them. I mean, it says shall not be infringed, right? I've got my license to carry here in the state of Texas. And I believe that the Second Amendment, I don't think it's for hunting, right? It's to protect. I think it protects our country from foreign invasion. I think it protects our citizens from a tyrannical government. But the right to bear arms is such an important amendment. I mean, it's right there after the first one, as people say. They put it up there at the top, number 2. So I will never support any legislation that restricts those rights in any capacity whatsoever.
Okay, sounds good. I appreciate your answer there. And so we're going to move along to the next question, and it is, what is your stance on Ukraine? I know this has been a real hot topic in the news. It's kind of died down lately because of Israel, but what is your take on Ukraine?
Well, my take on Ukraine is, first of all, I would not vote to send $1 more to Ukraine. And here's why. I don't think the United States has any strategic reliance on Ukraine. A lot of people, especially the incumbent that I'm running against, he likes to say that if we don't, we could be on the verge of World War III, because Russia will, once they overtake Ukraine, they'll go into Poland. And I just don't agree with that. I don't know why anyone thinks that if Russia is having a hard time with Ukraine, who is not really the best military on the planet, if they're having such a hard time with Ukraine, and they're struggling with manpower, with resources, that they're going to, once they finish with Ukraine, have the ability to go into a NATO nation and then be successful at that point. I just don't see that happening. And I think that's a fear-mongering tactic by a lot of the politicians that want the money to go over there, because war makes a lot of people rich, right? And so a lot of people are really pushing that so they can line their own pockets. I just don't see any realistic future of Russia going anywhere past Ukraine. So I am against that war. And, I think the war is over pretty much already. The only way Ukraine has a path to victory, in my eyes, is if they start lobbing missiles or bombs into Moscow, which that's never going to happen. And so without them doing that, I don't think Ukraine has a way to victory. So any more billions of dollars we send over there is just kind of flushing it down the toilet.
Yeah, we've already wasted hundreds of billions. I agree with that 100%.
They're fighting for 60 billion more as we speak.
Yeah,
and
being a Marine, I remember being on the Essex, and back then I prayed for war, which sounds kind of crazy, but we trained for war. But today, with a little more wisdom, I'm like, no, that when you lose, I've lost friends in law enforcement to where I've had to drag their dead bodies, and the thing is, if we continue on this path, I believe we'll end up seeing more U.S. troops, because as well as I do, I bet there's Marines, Force Recon, other MARSOC units already in Ukraine, because when I was in the Marine Corps, I worked with, anyway, I could go on and on. So 100%, I really appreciate your honesty on that. And that I really think we need to pull out of Ukraine any support. I can't believe that we actually sent them Abrams and F-16s, but it's a mess.
And to be clear, this is also one of those issues where that's my stance, right? And that's something that I would turn to the voters of the district and speak with them about. And I've got some, and not to get too far off topic here, but I've got some things in the works, because if elected, I want to be able to give people the opportunity to be part of the process like they've never had the opportunity before. And what I mean by that is we're already in the design stage, kind of tossing ideas around with some developers about whether it's an app on your phone or a website that allows registered voters in our district to log on to this app or website and not only give their opinions on issues that I could check constantly, but give them a chance for polling. How would you vote on this issue, right? And give them the chance to actually have their voice heard. And that's something we're working on. But definitely Ukraine, I'm completely against it, but I would also take the advice or see what the will of the people of the district were before making that vote.
That's a good idea. I mean, you see these polls on Twitter, on Facebook that you can do. So that probably wouldn't be that hard to get it running. And I mean, if you really care about the people's voice, that's a great idea.
Yeah, and and it's just we're working on some of the security measures there to make sure that it is registered voters in the district that are on there, not people from other states or whatever. So we're working on it, and it's not going to be an easy thing to do. It's not going to be ready to roll on day one, but it's something that I'm looking to implement in Texas District 6.
That's awesome. Maybe that's something that we can lead the nation in. So,
that would be nice. Yes.
So one other hot topic, you spoke a little bit already, I believe, and that is, what is your stance on the border?
My stance on the border is, excuse me, you remember in the Marine Corps when we were taught medical training, stop the bleeding, start the breathing, right? And so we have to stop the bleeding at our border. We are bleeding like we would not believe at the southern border. I've been down there myself. I've seen it firsthand because I don't really trust what I see on the news. And so before I spoke about it, I wanted to see it with my own eyes. And so I did go down there to Eagle Pass, Texas, and I saw it for myself. And it was, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And we are bleeding at our southern border, and we have to stop that bleeding. I think whether it's the United States military, I wouldn't have a problem with them going down to help that effort, whether it's the National Guard, whatever it may be, we need to go down there and stop that bleeding. Once we stop the bleeding, then we can start looking at how we can have some immigration reform, whatever that may be. But we can't let the bleeding continue while we're working on immigration reform. And that's what they're doing right now. They're not closing the border. They're just trying to come up with reform. And while they're doing that, people are still flooding in, by the tens of thousands per day. And we just can't continue to maintain that. We have to have a border. That's what makes a country, right? That's what gives it makes us a sovereign nation, is that border. And every other country in the world, it's okay for them to have borders and certain measures for people to come in and be citizens. And we should, as a country, should have that same right. And just because we enforce those laws doesn't make us evil people or racist or whatever it may be that some people like to throw out at those that want to close the border. But yeah, absolutely. That's number one priority. And if I was in Washington, D.C. today, everybody would already know, because I would have told them, don't bother putting any bill in front of me unless it's a standalone border or a bill to secure the border. I wouldn't vote on any other issue until that was done. That is our nation's number one priority at this very moment. And I wouldn't connect it to another bill to kind of sway people. It's either you support a closed border or you don't. And you have to make these politicians put their stance on paper, because when they start adding other bills to other bills, then things kind of get lost a little bit. And so, but yeah, that's where I stand on the border. It needs to be closed, and it needs to be closed today.
So, speaking of that and talking back to the Constitution, that's one of the things that says the federal government's job is to defend our borders, correct?
Absolutely. And yeah.
And that's where I'm a very big constitutionalist, in case you can't already pick up on that. And
right. No, that's good.
That our nation is failing right now because of who's in office. And I believe that we've really got to take back to the Constitution. And it says that the job of the federal government is not, the 10th Amendment. It says that the states take care of the people, that the laws are the states, unless it's documented in the Constitution. That's what the 10th Amendment says, is all other laws are to the states. But one job that it does have in the Constitution says to defend the states from invasion, defend it, and we've got an invasion. So,
and then once our state tries to enforce those laws, we've got an administration that's actively suing our state for protecting those borders. I mean, if you would have told me this 10 years ago, I would have said you were lying. That'll never happen. I can't believe what's happening today.
Yeah. I don't know if you've seen today, the news from yesterday and today, but they've got a park down in Eagle Pass, I guess, that the Texas National Guard has taken over and kicked the Border Patrol out of there because the Border Patrol keeps trying to cut the wire and stuff. So, which to me, that's kind of a violation of our Constitution on the Border Patrol side. But
Yeah.
I know I can get on these topics and talk for a long time. So I want to give this time to you and for the people to hear your voice. So I'll move on to the next question. And some of this, I had two questions, but I'm going to narrow this down to one. And I think President Trump really brought a lot of this to light. And that's why I'll narrow this down to just one. Do you feel our elections are free and fair? Because I look at the past, and this is where I'll give the emphasis. I support Trump. And when I look at everything that's going on, it's not free and fair. And that's where I'm asking you, how do you feel? Is it free and fair, our elections? And if there's anything that you think you could fix, anything like that?
So here's I've been asked that question before, and here's my answer to that. You know the old expression, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And so I kind of look at the elections the same way. And when it came to the 2020 election, you know, I followed it very closely. And I watched all of Donald Trump's rallies where there was 30, 40, 50,000 people at each one. And they weren't just there being quiet. They were there enthusiastically, right? Screaming and hooting and hollering. And they were proud to be there. And then I would watch the few events that Biden did. You know, there would be 12 cars in a parking lot or something. And it just didn't. And for the numbers to come in the way they did, it just didn't add up. Something was fishy about that election. What is it? I don't know, because I'm not in a position to see the evidence and a lot of the information that people in DC have access to, right? So there's a lot of information there that I don't think that normal people don't have access to. So it's something wasn't right about it. So I don't think it was a fair election, but I don't have a specific piece of evidence to where I can say, here's the smoking gun, 100%. This is what it was. It was something. I just don't have the answer to what that something was, if that makes sense.
There were a lot of clues, like a dump at 3 a.m. in the morning, a lot of things that just don't add up. And that's, as a law enforcement officer, we call it a clue. And you start putting those clues together, kind of like you're talking about walking like a duck, looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, then it's probably a duck. And that's where in law enforcement, we usually take all these things, we put them together. And I don't want to go a whole lot into detail on that, but I really believe that we've got to have free and fair elections if we want to have a nation that exists.
I agree 100%. I would support a voting day being a national holiday. I've heard that thrown out, you know, several times in the past. I would support that. I think that having a national holiday where nobody was at work, you know, and it was the national voting day, I would not have a problem with that. I think that there's, you know, these absentee ballots and mail-in ballots, those were designed or created, I think, for those of us that were deployed, or maybe the elderly or the disabled, but not for just people that are too lazy to get off the couch and go vote. And I think that's what it's turning into. And I think it's breeding corruption, and it's too easy to manipulate that system one way or the other. And so I completely agree we should have these free and fair elections. And I don't think we do at this time. I'm like kind of like a lot of people, you know, what is it that you don't want to make it a federal thing, because that's not how it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a state-run thing, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that, but I don't know what the answer is. I know it needs an answer, but I don't have one yet.
Yeah. Okay. Well, for the final thing here, it's not really a question. It's just kind of a, hey, speak your piece. If you want to speak to the voters, speak to anyone listening, what really is about what you want them to hear about you.
Yeah. So it kind of all comes down to this. If you are not happy with the way Congress is running, or the way government in general is not running, when you go vote in this primary, whether it's on February 20th for early voting or March 5th for the main election day, do not vote for the incumbent, right? Our incumbents in Congress have a 91% reelection rate, while at the same time having a 15% approval rating. It makes no sense. The math doesn't add up. If you want change, you can't vote for the incumbent, or you won't get the change that you're looking for. You've got a candidate in front of you right now promising to make these changes that you're looking for. And I know you've heard it before. You know, it's another campaign promise. But I'm not doing this for me. I'm a high school history teacher, and when I retire, I will be a teacher when I retire. I'm not looking for a new career. I believe in term limits. I want to go up to Washington, D.C., help get us back on track, and then come back to the classroom. And hopefully the district brings somebody like-minded in to replace me. And we'll do a proper turnover. You know, here's what's working, here's what's not working, all of those good things, and set that new representative up for success before I head back to Corsicana. And so if you want that type of candidate, my name is Cliff Wiley. I would appreciate your support. And I want to make sure, one thing I didn't say earlier that I wanted to mention when we were talking about some of these other issues, you know, when we were talking about the Constitution, and this is the number one law, right? So as a representative, as much as I respect and will follow the will of the people in the district, this will always come first. The Constitution will come first. The people in the district will come second. And so I want to make sure everybody understands that. But you will have the chance to participate in government like you've never had before if you vote for me, Cliff Wiley, for Congress. If you have any questions, please visit our website. It's easy to remember, wileyforcongress.com. Or if you can go to Facebook or whatever, my personal cell phone number is posted all over the place. Shoot me a text, give me a call. I'll spend 30, 40 minutes talking to you, answering your questions. I'm available to you now during the campaign, and I'll be available to you once elected. So please, if you have questions for me, don't hesitate to reach out.
Well, Cliff, I really appreciate your time. I look forward to seeing you out there on the campaign trail and everything like that. And for everyone that's watching, please share this stuff. Let everybody hear what your representatives have to say. I'll be on next week with the incumbent, but really vote for what you believe in. That's what I've got to say more than anything. Use common sense. Vote for the people that stand for what you stand for. So
yes, and if I can say one more thing.
Yes, sir.
So on the congressional part of the ballot, at least in Texas District 6, you've got 3 names that are going to be on there. I want to make sure everyone that sees this knows who those candidates are. Jake Elsey is the incumbent. That means he's the guy that's already there now. Myself, Cliff Wiley, I'll be on the ballot. And then there's a third gentleman. His name is James Buford. Check out all 3 candidates. And like you said, find the one that most closely aligns with your morals and your values and your wants out of your government. And then that's the one you should vote for. Whether it's me, James, or Jake, find the one that fits your values, and then you will feel good about your vote.
Amen. Well, I really appreciate your time and everything. And if you don't have anything else, we'll go ahead and end the broadcast today.
All right, I appreciate the time.
Thank you, sir.